all the questions are saved till the end of our presentation when there will be a Q&A period. At that time, you'll be able to either ask your questions through the chat function here in Teams or raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute yourself to ask your question. If you have any questions about specific facility operations, we do suggest that you refer to our online resources and reach out to our help desks as necessary. Okay, Mike, next slide, please. Great. So before we get started, I would like to mention that a copy of our previous webinar for this year, which was given on February 15th, can also be found on our website. There's a recording and a PDF of that slide deck from the 15th. The webinar that was on the 15th is a high-level overview of EIS, and it was also focused on the amendments to CTR, whereas today's training will delve deeper into the use of the EIS portal. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a quick agenda. First, we will review the data requests that were sent out to the facilities, including the deadlines associated with those data requests. Then we'll highlight some resources available to users to aid in the use of EIS, followed by Lakes giving a demonstration of the EIS portal. And then lastly, we will end with that Q&A period and give you some contact information for the district as well. The EIS demonstration is expected to be a thorough review of the EIS portal and should take about an hour. So after the presentation is complete, that's when there will be the Q&A period. Okay, next slide. So for the 2022 data requests, as mentioned in our previous webinar, district staff have made best efforts to help identify facilities that are required to report 2022 emissions, including those which are part of CTR's regulation, phase 1. The district has prepared a list of facilities which are required to report data year 2022 emissions to reported in 2023 and can be found on our website. Some facilities may not be included on this list based on specific emissions or activity levels, which were not available for the district to assess. So please note that this list is not encompassing of all facilities required to report. And if a facility is not listed, that doesn't mean it is exempt from reporting. Oh, sorry, Mike. Thank you. So any facility with an active permit should complete their own applicability assessment to determine if reporting is required for 2022. The district has mailed listed facilities the 2022 data request letter. It should have been received at some point in the last month. To date, the district has sent roughly 2,300 letters to facilities for data year 2022. If we had an updated email address on file, we also emailed those facilities with a generic 2022 data request. In general, if your facility did not receive a 2022 data request letter and you think you should, please contact us for a data request letter. Okay, Mike. Yeah. This was also mentioned in our previous webinar, but I think it's important to bring up again to review the associated due dates for 2022 inventories. Like I mentioned on the last slide, the district has sent out data request letters starting in mid-January, and the portal launched on February 7th. If you received a data request letter before the portal launch on February 7th, then your emissions inventory due date is 60 days from February 7th, which is April 7th, 2023. Otherwise, the due date for your emissions inventory is 60 days from the date that is listed on the letter. Extensions are available by request and approval by the district, but should not exceed May 1st for CTR facilities. If you would like to request an extension, please email us at our help desk. We'll have the email available to you at the end of the presentation. Lastly, after the emission inventory data has been submitted by facilities, the district has till August 1st to calculate emissions and submit them to CARB. Slide. So before we get started on the demo of the EIS portal, I would like to mention that we have some additional resources available to help reporting in the EIS portal. There's 3 listed here, although if you visit our website, we do have additional resources that are not seen on this slide. The first one that we have on this slide is the EIS portal user's guide, which is a step-by-step instructions on how to report your emissions inventory. That also has an example at the very end for reporting diesel engines, which is a good resource. Second, we have a new frequently asked questions document to help with any questions associated with the use of EIS and reporting emissions inventory data. Also, we have published most of our calculation methods used to create emission inventories. That's available on our emission calculations procedure website. We will also be publishing additional methods in the coming weeks. Okay, so now I will hand over the presentation to Lakes Environmental to give a demonstration of the EIS portal.
Thank you, Jonia and Mohsen. It's a pleasure to be here and present to all of the EIS users who are in attendance and those who are curious about becoming an EIS user. I wanted to start out by noting, how do I request access? When you start out, you access the front page of the EIS portal. There is a request access link on the front page. Filling this out will allow you to sign in, enter your EIS ID, and then you'll get a notification. It is important to note that when that all users must register. So if you participated in the portal program in the previous year for data year 2021, you will still need to register. This is simply because we have so many accounts that have come and gone. We need to make sure that all the active accounts are active and that the older accounts that were on the system become dormant and become archived. This is just for security and to make sure that we have the right people accessing the accounts who may have moved on, and we just do not want to have that. A couple of things to note. When you go to the request access, it will say access request form. This is for registering either agents or secondary users on the system, as well as the initial RO request who wants to sign in and unlock their EIF ID. For those who have multiple EIF IDs under their portfolio, please note that you can now enter multiple EIF IDs in the registration list. You can enter them simply by entering them by commas and then entering your email address and concluding. Now I'd just like to discuss a little bit about what happens when I sign up. If you are the RO listed on the required to report list, your RO account will be activated immediately. So you will get a confirmation email and a password reset email sent to your registration address that will indicate that you can reset your password and then you can begin signing in and using EIS. If you need to request or approve other users, you can do so once you're signed in. If you are not the RO, then the RO, who is the controlling interest of the facility, will receive an email asking them to approve your request. You will receive a confirmation detailing your request, as well as who is the RO at the other end of the facility. This is to help facilities who have had a transition during the year and haven't had a chance to update APCD with the new RO credential details. So when you look at your registration or confirmation email, you will note that this says, "We notified on behalf that you are requesting access." Take a look at this address. If it's not someone who's currently with your company or your organization, you can then go in and request an RO transfer and change over and become the RO if that's your new role. Otherwise, please sit tight and wait for the RO to sign in. They will be able to access EIS and they will be able to approve your access. When they approve your access, a secondary email will come out and you will be able to gain access. If the RO is listed on that email, or if you look at the required to report list and see that that RO is not active, you can use the request RO link from the main page. Doing so will allow you to become the RO and take over the account as necessary so that the submission process can be followed, completed, and ultimately submitted. A couple of reasons to request the RO status. The RO is no longer with the organization, or if you've identified that the person on the RO required list is no longer available. There's also a case where if we do not know the contact, that this is also a good time to do so. If you are changing the RO, please make sure that you update APCD so that they can have your information on file so that subsequent reporting years will be able to go directly to you, and you don't have to go through these extra steps. Once you have signed into EIS, and I will show that after a bit, you will see that if you are the RO, there are two dashboards. There is the inventory users. This dashboard shows you who has access to your inventory data. So this will show you the username, their status, and what role they carry with the organization. If you need to change or revoke the RO status for an account, you can do so through this action page. If you have pending users who have gone through the registration and you want to approve them, you can change through this action. You can approve or deny them. Or if you need to deny them mid-year, you can also change and click the deny and remove them from having access to your confidential data. We leave this in the hands of the RO so that you are the best one able to understand who has requested access and then whether you want to grant them. This way, the help desk or the APCD does not interfere with revealing your confidential data online. How do I request this RO status change? From the main page, you'll see that there's a secondary link below the request access link called the request RO status. Simply click on this link. A similar form will come up, and you will note that there is the RO request page. It looks very similar to the request access page, so please make a note that at the top of the page, you'll see this request RO link, and make sure that you fill out the appropriate one. It just asks for your email and the EIF ID. Again, the EIF ID is on the letter that you may have received, or it's on the required to report list. Now let's talk about what happens when you do that request, RO status. Currently, the RO who is on file will receive an email with your request. So in case they just haven't gone in and registered as yet, they still will get a notification that you're interested in becoming the RO. The registrant will also receive an email with the details of the current registrant, so that if you need to contact them, that's fine. If they're still with the org, but they're not in that role, you can still reach out to them. And the RO should then sign in and grant your account. Now, a couple of notes. If your facility does not have an RO, currently about 200 of the 2,300 with no RO, your account becomes the RO automatically. This is simply to prevent the account from going into limbo and having requests go unanswered because the person is never going to be there. If the RO hasn't registered and you request RO, you will also be granted RO status automatically. Again, for the reasons that if the RO of record has moved on, has left because of a temporary duty assignment, say at a federal facility, or is just no longer available or is not currently available during the reporting period. This allows you to unlock the account and be able to access and carry on with the reporting requirements. And this is simply a mechanism to allow access without long delays because of the deadlines that are involved with the EIS CTR reporting. So let's talk about how to log on. The top link here in green shows the link for EIS. Simply type in HTTPS EIS SanDiegoCounty.gov/portal. You don't necessarily need all of these things, but it's the fastest way if you use this full link. You'll simply enter your username and your password from when you signed up. Doing so will just log you on into the system, and you will come to the start page. The start page, when you sign in, is the master dashboard showing you all the things that you need to do potentially to complete your submission and a few other key points. Along the top, you'll see the task functions, the major features that are part of the dashboard, such as the EI questionnaire, the EIQ forms, which we'll talk about a little bit later. If you need to upload supporting documents, such as a source test, SDS, or MSDS supporting documents for the materials at your facility, you can do so. Finally, there's the emission submittal, and then there is an advanced data entry direct feature for allowing you to modify, add devices, add materials, remove devices that are retired from permits, and you can also do the data entry from this feature as well. Some users find this advanced mode a little more convenient, but we'll see as we go through. A couple of other things to note. There is now an available inventories dashboard. This will show you if you happen to have access to multiple inventories or multiple EIDs, this list will be updated with everyone that it's available to you. If you need to switch and access the other ID, you just simply switch the switch button. You'll note that, that your account will show your account in the upper corner, and there are some other things such as the submittal where you can just go direct if you need to do so. Here you can see the list of profiles. This is just a larger view of this and allows you to see all the EIDs in your profile. This just makes it simpler and easier to identify who you have access to at the current time. Again, the main features are the fill in the data online through the EI questionnaire, which we will cover in more detail. EIQ forms, if you want to download the Microsoft Excel forms that you can use with Excel, you can then download those, fill them out in a more comfortable environment, and then upload them back into EIS. Supporting documents, again, for material safety data sheets, source tests, and other documents requested by the district can be uploaded as part of the inventory process. And finally, there is the submittal page, which is our ultimate goal today, which is to get data entered into the system, completed, QA'd, and then ultimately submitted. Let's start with a demo. All right, let's start on. So here I am at my home page. I've entered my account. I am Mr. Joe Inventory. I fill out my password here. And I'll sign in. So here we are. We are in the system. A couple things we can do of note. Again, we'll just show you that we have the questionnaire, EIQ forms, supporting documents, submittal, and the data entry direct. If you are the RO, you will see these extra 2 boxes. If you are just an agent, you will not have access to these extra boxes for inventory users. This allows you to see who is available and who is not available as an RO. If I choose the revoke, I can choose that, and you'll see that instantly their RO status is gone. If I want to grant it, I can go ahead and grant it, no problem. If I have a sign up and I want to approve or deny the user, I can choose deny and remove them. If I refresh the page, you'll see that they have disappeared off the inventory users list. If I add them back in, refresh the page, we can see that they're now available. Again, this approve and deny process is pretty straightforward, but we just want to show you how that works in case you're not familiar or haven't done it before. Again, these just allow you to see who has access, and here's the potential list of folks who have registered for access, and you can approve them as you need. Okay. I think that covers a few other things. Again, you can just log out by clicking your email address and choosing the log out, and we'll stay here. At this point, I'm going to go back to slides just after we get a little bit more comfortable, and then we're going to cover a few other topics from here. Okay, so we'll talk about online data entry. There are 2 ways to do this, but the EI questionnaire is the opening way that most facilities may choose to do their entry. One suggestion from me, humbly, this is not the district's position, but this is just what I have observed when working with customers, that if you have less than 10 materials, you might choose to do the online questionnaire. This will save you the details of having to download all the forms, fill them out, and then upload them. If you're a much larger facility, such as one of the military or larger industrial sites in the region, the EIQ forms might be your better bet, simply because you have a larger amount of data to reconcile with. However, again, you can choose to use either mechanism, but this is just our possible suggestion, and it may be easier for you. When you do choose to use the online forms, there's a couple of things that happen when you sign in. You'll note that across, it'll tell you your facility, the name of your facility, and then you'll see a list of all the forms. These are electronic versions of the forms that used to go out on paper and in PDF to facilities to fill out and return. This is now online in an electronic form. So you'll see a list of all the permits, site records, the devices, the material IDs, and you'll see the calculation methods that were applied currently to those materials and devices. A couple of other things to note is that you'll have a list. This will tell you how many materials you have. So you can see here, I'm looking at the first 5 of 10. Another nice handy feature is that once I've looked at one form, I can choose this next button and I can progress through each of the forms. So once I have filled out one form, I can save the data, I can click the next, and it will just go on to the next form, and then you can progress and progress until it's complete. Now, if we wanted to look at one of these online forms, please note that we will see that it'll show the calculation method. This is the method used by the district currently for this particular device and material to estimate the emissions. You'll note that there is tabs for the data request data. This used to be on the form. The control information, such as the point of release or any kind of curtailment technologies involved, the custom emission factors that are used, or the current emission factors if they are defaults, and the surrogate pollutants. A couple of things you can do from here. You can see the current method, such as wipe cleaning uncontrolled. So this means this is a particular method listed on the website. You can change this calculator by clicking this button. And this will just update it to whatever you believe is necessary. Understand that this is based on the permit currently, but if you feel that this is needs to be updated, you can choose to do so. The data request has a couple of things to note. The green fields, every one of these are required fields. These are the ones you must fill out. These are the ones that are involved in the calculation. So you'll see that the material name, the annual material usage, the amount shipped off site, each of these forms will be a little different, but these are the ones that are required. If you look at the control tab, again, you will see the types of data that's required. You'll see things such as if it's releases through a stack or event, the stack and the stack information is now required. You'll have the capture efficiencies, the controls, and the release control and data. New to this year is that all points of release are requiring to have coordinate data. So you'll see a question for the longitude and latitude of this particular piece of equipment. So you'll have to enter that data. There is guidance online, and if you need help, you'll be able to follow that guidance and get the data supplied in it. Thirdly, let's look at the emission factors. A couple of things to note. These are the rules and the mathematical principles which help estimate the emissions on a per rate basis. So there's so much of a pound of emissions per fuel usage for in this case. It may be the number of cars produced. It may be the gallons of paint applied to surfaces. Note that if you need to adjust and customize the emission factors because of source testing, you can choose to enter those data fields and change them. They will turn yellow when they have been changed from their default. If they are white and they say the origin is the default, it's what the district gives as the default basis based on what has been scientifically identified. If you do choose to change this value, please note you'll also have to give the origin. The origin is where did you come by this value and field bank. The list is quite extensive, but allows you to identify it as being, say, AP42, source tested, MSDS or manufacturing sheets, gas analysis, EPAs, data for the particular material in question. This has to be filled out if you choose to go down this path. If you have a situation where you have a pollutant that is not on the default list, but you know is part of your process, you can choose to click Add, and you'll be able to select your pollutant. Here from this list, it has an extensive 929 pollutants. And then once you've picked your pollutants, such as aramite, you can click the Save, and then you can enter the emission factor and have the source of the data and save it. So this just gives you enough information where you're allowed to do your customization. This is also required if you have other solvents on site and you need to report them and they're not under a particular permit. So you will have to do this process if it applies to you. Lastly, after you have filled out all the data, you can go ahead and click the Save button at the top, and it will check the inputs to see if it's complete or not, and it will give you some feedback on that. If you didn't complete the data as I show here, you'll note that it will highlight all the boxes that were requiring extra data. They'll be highlighted in red. You'll note that if there are other tabs, the other tabs will also get red boxes around them to remember that you need to reveal the data on those other deals. You'll note that at the top, there is a button that from save, it's now back to edit. If you want to fix it right away, you can click this edit button and then rejoin your editing process and see that. We'll show this during the demo. A couple of other things to note. Sometimes you have equipment that is, or materials that are no longer in use. So if you're wanting to report no usage or you have zero emissions because of no throughput for the year, maybe that particular process isn't used this year or for during that year, you can choose the zero emissions button. You click the button for those no usage or zero usage, and it will bring up a selection box. You should choose to say, yes, we want zero emissions, and then you choose the reason. This reason will just bring up a selection box, and you can choose, say, if it's not applicable, it's in maintenance, mothballed, something of this nature was sold during the year, you can choose to zero out. Once that is done, you click the save. It will ask you to confirm, are you sure? Because this is going to take the data out of the system. You click yes, and then you will note that it is kind of given this watermark over the top with like almost like a stamp saying that there's zero emissions. This is so you know, instead of trying to look here at the usage or the maximum hourly to look for a zero, it's very clear that you have reported no usage on this particular item. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to do a little demonstration and we'll follow along. Go back to Joe's account, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose the EI questionnaire. And again, it's going to load up, and here we are inside the questionnaire. Well, again, we can see our facility ID, the name, and we can see the list of all of the compounds that we may need to fill out. So we'll go one by one. As I scroll down, we can see the material, calculation method, the material name. If we want to choose, that'll be a drop down. We can say solvent, material usage in gallons. Let's put 1,000. Problem, offsite, let's say 0, density 10, and the VOC content. We look at the controls. Again, we can see, we can fill along, and we can fill out the hours. Let's say it's 8 hours at 24 hours a day. It's a continuous process. We're 7 days a week, and we are 365 days. And it's just simply filling out the information, answering the question. If I go ahead and I try to save this, it will save my data. But you'll note that here, all the data that I filled out is kept. There's nothing going to be lost, but it's going to remind me, excuse me, that these values still need to be entered. And so that's what the QA will show. If I wish to edit it, I can go back and edit, see that my other data was saved, even though it had some incomplete, and then I can enter other values. So I can say the height above the ground is 100 feet, diameter is 3 or 4, exit temperature, let's say 690, and the exhaust cubic feet, I don't know, say 90 cubic feet. Capture efficiency is 100%, and the control, no controls. And for the longitude, I'm going to say for west, I'm going to say it's 117, and the latitude should be about 23 degrees north. If you need to go west, of course, these will need to be entered as negative numbers and so forth. Now, if I save this, still a few things that seems to be missing, and we can choose either to click this QA button or we can see here and hunt for the red. I'm just going to go ahead and fix this again. So go down here, say it's 100, capture say 100%. And then again, if I go back and save it and see how we got no red, that means that we've completed our operation. Now, if I want to move on to the next one, I can just come up here. I can choose this one. I can either click here like this, or if I was here again and I click next, it'll just go on to the next one. This just means it's handy for us to keep cycling through each one of these. So now I just want to show how we could zero the emissions on an item. So if I highlight that first item again, now we can see that this is data. If I wanted to, I could say, well, actually, I think there was zero usage this year, so I'm going to click the 0. I check the box saying, yes, I want this to be 0. I select from the selector, and I can say it was not applicable, it's in maintenance, out of service, and then I come in down here, save, go to save it, confirm that, yes, I do want to do this, and now we can see that it's zeroed out the emissions. So far, so good. And that is pretty much everything that there is to doing the online emissions entry. From there, I can just go back to the dashboard and we can return back to the presentation. All right. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about, we just saw how we did the online presentation, but now let's talk about for some larger facilities or users who want to do more with using Excel. From the start page, we click on the EIQ forms, and we'll note that we are automatically put into the download feature. We will have all of the forms bracketed by particular method and family, such as combustion for diesel, cleaning, there are gaseous fuels, there's solvents and cleaning categories. All you have to do is either highlight the file name here to download it, and it will save it to your hard drive, or you can click the download if that's more convenient to you. Once you do that, you can open up the Excel file, and you'll note that you're presented with a table of contents showing the list of all the materials, the device, the permit, and the description of the material here on this handy table of contents. Note that it will show you the worksheet that it's available on, so you can see P1, or you can also see P1 here. We give this table of contents so it's easy to identify what's in the file up front. And once you click on each one, it will take you to the actual form data. In the Excel file, you'll see the site information, so it'll give you your EIF ID, the site name, the site record ID, the address in the San Diego area, the reporting year, in this case it's 2022, the permit number that this particular material applies for, and the device information. So this is information pre-filled for you. You don't have to do anything. You simply have to scroll down the page in this worksheet and then fill out the green fields as that are mandatory, but it would also be handy if you filled out any of the blank fields that are not marked green, just for completeness. Once you do that, you can save the data, and then you can go back to EIS, access the EIQ forms, and you can choose the upload on the side. Here, there is the nice upload button, which will allow you to guide you through how to do that process. Again, the first step of the wizard is to confirm the facility. A lot of people say, well, why do we do this? One of the reasons is because many people who have lots of facilities with lots of data, we want to make sure that you're uploading the right forms into the right site and you're saving yourself some time without getting frustrated. So it'll just give you the facility, just take a look, make sure it's okay. If it's okay, you can go ahead and click next, and you're on to the next step. Here you'll see that you can upload your file. So with the combustions file we just saw, it will upload the data after we click finish. Please note, when you upload data from Excel, if you did some partial online data, it will replace what is online with what you've put, 100%. So if you partly filled out and then said, I want to do this with Excel, it will replace exactly. So if you filled out your Excel completely, you can upload it and do so. After you upload it, you'll see the processing because there's a lot of people on the system. You'll see your place in the queue. It'll say that it's submitted, and after a few seconds, it will show you that it is completed, and you can look at the form data online. Okay, so let's do a quick demo. Okay, so again, we're on the dashboard. We're here at the start, and we can see the EIQ forms, and we're able to select a form from the list, and it's easy. We can either say combustion gaseous fuels, and you'll see that it downloads, or I can click the download link and it'll download the file for me. Sometimes the forms take a little bit of time. Of course, it's going to download one by one. Oh, there we go. So then I can see here in my list, I'm going to go ahead and open the file and up with Excel. I'm going to turn on the editing so that I can enter data. I can come here. I can see P1, and then I can see my form. Scroll down. I can enter my usage, so I can say 1,000, max hour usage 10, annual fuel usage 36,000. Say that again, still max hour 10. If I want to leave the values for the stack, I can leave those as is, and I can enter my and I can select my datum. Leave this as NAT 83. That's probably what we want. And then you'll note that there are also the compounds at the bottom. So you can enter all of these values. You can see what is currently there. These are the defaults. And if we need to add one, we can do so here. So we can say arrow. Right. Just like that. We can see the values just like that. I can save it, close Excel, and I can go back to the website and I can choose the upload. Choose the upload document. Again, it's going to confirm that this is the facility that I want to use. I do. I'll click next. Click select file. I click that. Open, selected the file I just uploaded, and I go ahead and I click finish. Immediately I can see that it's submitting. It's put my name on it, so it knows who is uploading it, the date and the time, and it just says submitted, and it will roll through here in just a few seconds. And then you can see that it switched from submitted to completed and finished. And that is the settings. So now if I go to the emissions, I go to the dashboard, sorry, and I want to check that value, I can look in the EIQ forms. I can look for diesel. I should be able to scroll down. Emissions. I think it's because it was zeroed out. Let's try that again. Oh, no, there we go. Here we can see the values that I entered, the 1-1723, and if I look at the control request, I can see even though it had been zeroed out when I imported the data, we can see that the values were here. Everything is as we expected. All the values that I entered are complete. Put that back to 0 so that we can submit. But I can demonstrate the incompleteness. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard. Now let's resume the presentation. Back. And let's talk about the submittal process. So after we have either uploaded all the forms and we're comfortable with what we've put into the system, or we have entered all the data online, we can start the emissions submittal process. So we can click on the emissions submittal from the start page. We can see we're in the system, and we can see that there are two larger buttons in the middle of the page for our facility. We can confirm that it's for the facility, and we can see that we are in the notice to submit. This means that we are expected to submit data. We can choose to run the QA/QC as a pre-check before submittal, and then once we have gone through that, we can go ahead and submit the data. So I will go ahead and do so now. When I click on the QA/QC, we'll note that if we see it in pink, this means that there is something missing. This means that there is something for us to do still. There is a document produced in Excel format that you can click on and download, and it will show you what is missing. When we open up the document, it will show us all the data elements and all the items under the value, say that it's incomplete. We can see the site record, and we can see what we need to go and find data for and where we need to enter data. If a particular material and device is complete, it will show as passed. So our goal here is to make sure that we have for every device and material, we have a passed or a complete entry. If we run the QA/QC and we get the green bar, that is success. There is also a report for that, but it shows everything as passed, but I expect that everyone will want to keep this for their records, showing that their data was complete right before they submitted it. And if you see the green, then we have good luck. If we look at a completed form, you'll see that everything is passed, and we can see the facility, the site record, the material, and all of the details for all the materials that were in our inventory. The last thing is that when we click the submit button, if we do one last check, it should also be green. And then you'll note that you can click next to proceed on that we're ready to do the submit. And here is the part that the ROs need to certify. You need to certify that you're the owner or the operator duly appointed, and that you're the one who's going to make the data, and that the data that is there is complete. Check this box, and then you can click finish. And doing so, you'll see that you have success, and your status switches from notice to submit to submitted, and the district will get your data and have a look at it and do the assessments and the inventory calculations from there. Okay, so finally, let's do one last demo, second last demo, and we'll proceed. Again, we come to the submission page, we click on that. We're ready to run our QA process. Hopefully that'll get fixed in edits. See the run for the QA/QC. When I click on it, do the evaluation. Again, it will show that it's incomplete. I have the list. Download the file. And then we'll note. This will list all the equipment data that is incomplete and needs attention. And then we can see any documents that we may have uploaded or required for this facility. And this just gives us a list of anything we may have also uploaded. So we'll go back and we'll just fix the equipment, and then we'll make our submittal. So with that, let me finish that. Okay, there we go. Now we've completed our entry, and we'll see that we have all the equipment data is complete. If it's zeroed out or if it was entered in as actual values, it would be shown as this. And we can see again that all the documents We can save this to our hard drive, keep it, and then we are ready to do the submittals. We click the submit button. It will do one last check. Again, we'll get an opportunity to download the QA file showing completeness. We click next. I can click that I certified that it's ready. And then I'm ready just to click finish. And doing so, we'll see that it's submitted. And at that point, we have completed the emissions inventory process. Okay. Now for the last, there are a few last topics just to cover. Is about adding and removing devices and materials. If your permit is maybe, if the devices that are listed in your EI questionnaire, if there's other devices that you need to add to your facility to make your submittal complete, you can do so using the data entry direct capability. Clicking on the data entry direct will bring up a data entry direct page. On this page, you will see a listing all of the permits. So it'll show the permit in the site record, and by highlighting a given permit, you can see all of the devices. If you need to do so, you can create or remove. And if you need to add or remove a material, you can do so using these capabilities. To add and remove a device, you select a permit, and then you use the create and remove and simply fill in the data that comes below. You'll simply add them. If you need to add a material, you can fill out the material information after you click create. You can enter the material description, entering, say, my new paint. And then you go ahead and click select a calculation method. This is one of those from the recommended from the district's list. Just choose a particular method. It's based on what you see online. Go ahead and click select, and then it will update the form automatically. So then you can then go ahead and here enter it, or you can use the EI questionnaire if you choose to. Now just a quick demo, and then we can begin the question and answer period. Okay. All right. All right. Go to the data entry direct. We highlight the facility. Again, we can see we need to add a particular device. We can choose to create. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see the input form for our new device. We put in our device, say 100. We can enter our description, boiler, and then I can go ahead and save my device. So now we'll see that we've added my boiler, and that's all we have to do to add the particular boiler. If on the material, if I want to go ahead and add a new material for this, for example, fuel combustion, I can click the add, and it will give me a material ID immediately. So I can enter, say, 100, start playing. And I will say it's natural gas. And then I can scroll down and I can select a calculation method. So I can select the calculator. I can say yes. Fuel, save gaseous fuel combustion. Click that, click select, and you'll see that my form updated instantly to change that form. Then I can go ahead and I can enter all the other data such as design capacity, units, and complete the request as necessary. So I can also, from this page, I can do this data entry, or I can go back and complete it from the online questionnaire if I so choose. Again, when I click save to keep the new material, you'll note that it will always run the QA and let me know that there's things that are still incomplete. So I can see the list of things that I still have to fill out. So if I want to come back at a later date because I'm ready, I need to break for lunch or I need to do something else, I can at least know what I need to fill out. Okay. With that, I think we can just go on and move on to the summary. Just to summarize, there are two ways to enter data. There's the online forms. This is for smaller facilities that are not submitting a lot of data, and it's maybe a little bit quicker to go through and just fill out the forms. If you're a larger facility, maybe you need to use the EIQ forms. This is not required or mandatory, as you can choose to do either one of those mechanisms as fits your work style. Understand when you do a submittal, the QA/QC will check your input before submitting, and be very aware that only the RO can do the submit. So the RO is the only account that can actually see the submittal actions, and those are the only ones who can run the QA and actually complete the actual submittal. Okay, so I think that concludes the presentation, and I'll turn it back to Jonia to conclude and then take questions.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so real quick before we start taking questions, I would like to point out on this slide that we have a couple ways to contact both us and Lakes for support. So for support related to EIS and the emissions inventory program, we have the two following help desks. The first for EIS technical support. This includes creating or modifying login information or designating an RO. Issues with uploading data, please contact Lakes directly at eis.support@weblakes.com. We also have another help desk here at the district. Please use this for questions related to permitted equipment, data to be submitted, or questions about applicability or your facility specifically. Please contact APCD inventory at sdapc.org. These are both on our website as well, and they will be in the presentation that's available online later today. So thank you everyone for waiting through the presentation for the questions, but that concludes our presentation for today, and we can move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We will start with the questions that have been left in the chat, or if you have questions, please include them in the chat. After those are resolved, we will move on to questions that you can ask yourself if you'd like to raise your hand, and at that time we will unmute you.
Thanks, Jonia. So the first question in the chat was from Dave. There's an EIS FAQ document addressing those who believe they're not subject to reporting. The FAQ notes to send an email to APCD inventory email address with the subject line, not applicable to emissions inventory requirements, and to cite justification for this. For those of us who have submitted this email, can you tell us how quickly we will receive a reply, and can you confirm that if we since we submitted this email, we don't need to report within the portal until after APCD has reviewed the request?
Sure. So a little context about facilities which may not be applicable to the emission inventory requirements. As I had mentioned earlier, a large number of facilities are required to report for 2022 because of the CTR amendments. The district has created a list of facilities we think are applicable based on permit information. Now, CTR requirements are based on actual data and actual emissions. So a facility may have been contacted by the district based on their permitted equipment who might not be applicable. And that is the reason for emailing us if you believe that you're not applicable to specifically CTR or emissions inventory. And we've requested to email the help desk with the subject line, not applicable to emissions inventory requirements. In general, our response rate from our help desk, we aim for it to be 24 to 48 hours during the work week. So if you haven't heard from us within 48 hours, I would suggest that you're probably going to hear back pretty soon, or you can contact us. I would not suggest to wait, specifically if, of course, if it's close to a deadline, to hear back from us. Although if you do believe now that you're not applicable, I would suggest reaching out to us as soon as possible.
Thanks, Jonia. Question from David. David is listed twice in the inventory users list. Should he remove one entry?
So there's two users, then when there should be one. If you're an RO, you could deny the other one, or if you're not an RO and you're just the user, I would suggest to contact Lakes at the email that's provided here on the screen to remove the duplicate.
Question from Alicia. Can users run the QA/QC tool or only ROs?
Yes, and this is actually what we saw earlier when Mike was logging in and out. So the reason, I think some other questions later down the chat will pertain to this as well. For today's demonstration, it is a generic inventory without specific facility information. We don't want to be sharing anybody's information online or during a training. And so the one that you saw earlier when Mike was logging in and out, it's because it was a user, not an RO, and it could run the QA/QC, but it could not submit. So the RO can only submit the report, but a user should be able to run the QA/QC report.
Okay, Eric from Bluescape notes that consultants are being defaulted to in the system as ROs if the actual RO has not been claimed yet by the site. And then he asks, do the ROs have the ability to approve of a consultant to be added as an agent?
Yes. Yeah. And so this is not just consultants per se. This would be anybody that are registered for the use of a facility when the RO has not claimed that site per se, meaning that they have not logged in. The reason being is that the initial responsible officials or ROs were designated as those that were on file with the district, but not all of those contact information is up to date. So we needed to allow for a way to someone to override that essentially and be the correct contact for this facility. So if an RO has not logged in and one is being requested, they will be defaulted. Once there is an RO though, they can approve and deny any agent status, being a consultant or someone else that has access to their facility.
I'd like to add a little bit to this. If you are going through the registration, the just request access, the only way you can become the RO automatically is if you look at the required to report list and the contact is empty. So let me, if I can just switch over real quick. If you see, sorry to point this out, but if you have the access and you bring up the spreadsheet from the APCD site, you'll see a list of facilities that are without a contact. Those absolutely, when you come through the request RO, absolutely will be granted because we have no way to know who is supposed to be, and the first person who shows interest will be. If you happen to be the agent, you will be given RO status, and you can of course revoke it from yourself if you do not feel you want that capability, or if you've discussed with the client, then you can do so. But otherwise, that's to cover this. If in the case where there is a contact at a particular facility from the public list, and you sign in, there you will not be granted RO status. However, if you go and do the request RO and you have an active account for another facility, you can inadvertently become the RO. We've noticed this in a couple of cases, and we've worked with clients to address this. But those are the two ways we know that you can become the RO directly when there isn't an active user. So if you are signing up and you just want to be an agent, please make sure you do go through just the request link, and it just says request access, and use that. And you will, unless it's one of these unclaimed facilities like this, where we don't know who the contact should be or will be, you'll just go in and stay an agent indefinitely.
Thank you, Mike.
Well,
okay, thanks. Yeah, that's good info for consultants to know. Michael asks, do we always use the zero emissions option if an item under the EID is not applicable or on site?
No, there are other options for removing devices. So in the last demonstration that Mike did, what was shown is the ability to add or remove at the device or material level. Currently, users do not have the ability to delete permits. So you can only delete to a certain degree in EIS. We suggest the use of the zero emissions function only because it doesn't get rid of historical information. So if you have information built into a form, say the name of an engine, the rated horsepower of that engine, something that might not change year for year, and you do a zero emissions, that will stay there until the next reporting season. If you removed it completely, then all of that information would be lost. So we do suggest to use the zero emissions function if there's a possibility of using it or having, say, that substance in the future at your facility. But if it is something that is completely removed, maybe there is a permit that was, potentially retired, although we would take that into account next time we set up the inventory. There is the option to delete a device if that is a route that you'd like to take as well.
In the chat, there's a lot of support for a demonstration of a emergency generator.
Yes, and so we thank you for these types of comments. We're looking for different ways that we can be able to support everybody through reporting in EIS. So we have heard there are a couple of very common equipment types, and we've heard that it would be useful to have demos for these, specifically emergency engines, small boilers, dry cleaners, and gas stations. These are a lot of facilities that make up the 2022 inventory for us. And so we understand that there is a need for some demonstration. We are not prepared today to demonstrate those because they're not in the generic inventory that we were sharing, and we don't want to share anybody's information, but we are creating short demonstrations that'll be available soon. And so I would suggest that you sign up for our listserv because we will notify everybody when those are online. And what those will be are small recordings, maybe YouTube, but there'll be recordings that are on our website that'll show demonstration of reporting for these specific equipment types.
Robert asks, does every site need an RO?
Yes, because an RO is the only user that can submit the report. So an agent can input data, but they won't be able to submit the report at the end.
Okay, Bud asks, where will the presentation be posted on the APCD website?
So I can post a link, or we can post a link in the chat. There is a website in our San Diego webpage called Emissions Inventory System, and that holds the links for the previous webinars and this one as well.
And that will also be uploaded to YouTube at the APCD channel. But Dave asks, for portable equipment, do we just select zero emissions for our facility, which is a storage yard, and expect the portable equipment to be reported by others where it is used?
So portable equipment can range in different types and sizes. In general, it should be reported at the location in which the emissions are being generated. And then they should be reported under the facility of the physical location. So if you have a facility with a physical address and somebody brings a portable, or you hire someone to bring in a portable piece of equipment on your property, then that should be reported in your inventory.
The only thing, Johnny, I would add to that, if you're a rental yard, but you do test those engines for maintenance and testing purposes at your rental yard, then those emissions need to be reported for that location.
At location. Thank you, Mohsen. That's a good point.
Ernesto asks, we use a small amount of soldering product, 6, I think it's millimeters per year. Do I have to report?
So in general, for all processes and equipment, for the most part, there are not usage thresholds to exempt a certain type of reporting, except for portable diesel engines. Those are only reportable if they're greater than 50 horsepower. But for everything else, most of the emissions threshold, or most of the thresholds that are part of the emissions inventory program are substance driven. So meaning it's dependent on what is in that soldering. And the SDS that you have for that solder. If any of those substances are listed substances, then that would need to be reported even though it's a small amount.
Dave is wondering, how do we report the longitude and latitude of portable equipment that moves around the county from construction project to construction project throughout the year?
Yeah, so for portable equipment, that takes place at the facility, like I mentioned earlier, the facility itself should be reporting that. For the most part, if it's point source data, meaning it's stationary, then you can have that location. But if it's a portable piece, then it should be accounted for where it was used at the facility.
Rick asks, we have a few devices whose description is sparse. We don't know what they are. How can we get help?
Sure. So we have, I had mentioned earlier, I think it's on slide 3, we have some resources online. We have the EIS portal users guide and the FAQ, which go into some of the general permit types, specifically one about the additional substances or the portable equipment. So I would suggest that you can refer to those. They have a longer description of what should be reported there. And after you review those, if you have additional questions, please reach out to us at the APCD inventory at sdapcd.org.
Okay, Daniel asks, Daniel has some detail here, so I'm going to try to summarize it. They have a paint spray booth, rarely used, and they used about 14, it looks like aerosol spray cans. And he's asking, what do I have to report? Do I have to list all spray cans and water-based paints?
Yeah, and this is a question that we get quite often, understandably. So coating operation, paint booths, they are systems that use quite a different number of paints or coatings within a given year. So a couple of things, like I had mentioned earlier, there is no usage threshold for coatings or paints. It is dependent on the criteria and toxic emissions that are seen in the SDS for that material. The reason being is that even though these might be small amounts, some small amounts of highly toxic chemicals can produce high emissions. So the suggestion is to submit all of the SDS information that you have and report individually. If it is aggregated, then when the district does the emission calculations, we will be conservative and use the most conservative SDS to quantify emissions for all of the materials reported.
Okay, Daniel also asked in the second part of his question, why do I have non-permitted devices? How does Daniel know what these are when he has a permitted generator at the site?
So yeah, we have tried to identify what these might be at a facility. So if you click on the non-permitted section, devices will show up on what we believe these may be, including additional substances or portable equipment. If nothing has shown up, that means we haven't identified anything that might exist at your facility, although, we don't know exactly what it is at your facility. So I would suggest either reaching out to us if you have any questions about applicability for maybe a certain piece of equipment. But in general, we're looking for sources of emissions for criteria and toxic pollutants.
Raymond asks, if we have submitted inventory information last year on hard copy, will that historic data already be in EIS as a starting point, or will everything be blank?
It might be. So we had to launch the portal before all of the 2021 data may have been finalized. So if there was previous data, activity data available to be transferred to the portal, it may exist and be in there. That's going to be associated with the inventories for 21 that had been finalized. If an inventory was drafted, that might not be the case. But in general, activity data should roll over year to year, this year and going forward in EIS. Since this was the first full year of the use of EIS, when we brought the inventories into the portal for reporting, it kind of depended on the status of that 21 inventory.
Okay, Lee has a question, and Lee, I see your hand up as well, so if we answer your question, you can lower your hand. Lee asks, for facility-wide / portable equipment, can they use a general facility location?
Yeah, so there are certain sources, like I will take one, for example, contractor welding, where it could occur at multiple different places. Those are fugitive emissions, so we wouldn't require a location, but if there is a portable piece of equipment, then that facility location can be used.
Wendy asks, what are we expected to do with the table of contents in the questionnaire? If these are deleted, can they still upload, and can they change tab names?
So Mike, I know that you probably are the best to answer this one.
Yes, of course. The table of contents during the upload is completely ignored, so that doesn't matter pretty much. The tab such as P1, P2, P3, it must begin with a letter P. That's how we identify them as being particular piece of equipment. So as long as they still retain the leading P, that's okay. So if it needs to be P diesel instead of P1, you're allowed to do that. But it will tell you that it didn't import something if you do change the name beyond that naming convention.
Thanks, Mike.
EP is asking, we use acetone and alcohol as cleaning agents in small amounts throughout the facility. Do we have to fill out the physical information such as stack and release emissions?
No, so those types of operations should be identified already as solvent cleaning, and there's a calculator associated with that, and that's a fugitive emission. So we have gone through all of our calculators and predetermined which ones have point sources, mean they require a stack and release location. This is a fugitive emission, meaning that we've already predetermined that the stack and release location is not needed for this. So it should be connected to a calculator that does not require stack and release information. If you find that not to be true, there is a possibility that the incorrect calculator was connected. You can reconnect a new calculator yourself, or if you have questions about what calculator to connect to that, you can email us at apcdinventory@sdapcd.org.
Yvette asks, if our permit does not designate or describe equipment controls regarding stack or release emissions, then can we add 0 in this section?
You can. I would suggest a review of your permit conditions for your permitted equipment. Although not in general, control should be listed in your equipment description. Sometimes specific controls are described in the conditions of your permit. So I would suggest a full review of your permits to determine your control efficiency. And then if it's not listed, then you can include the 0.
Melissa says that they are a manufacturing plant, and for their waste, they're combining several types of waste coatings into one. So how do we recommend that they calculate the different waste that's going into it looks like one barrel or one place?
Yeah, so in general, what we do is we apply the waste recycled to each individual calculation, meaning that if it's not used on site, it's not emitted on site. So if we don't know the exact amount that's leaving the facility for that specific coating, we can't say that it's been recycled or removed. If you do have one large amount and you would like to apply that to your coatings overall, I would suggest contacting us, and we can probably look at what facility information you have available and come up with a solution.
Okay, and a related question to that, EP is asking, along the same lines, can they use approximate amounts for their waste if they don't know exactly how much they have?
So we do allow engineering estimates to be included as part of the data requested for some of these data requests, including the waste profile. But like I suggested, to reach out to us, every facility is different and the way that they collect waste is different. So we might be able to come up with a solution after we review your permits.
Mark asks, is there a telephone support number?
So as you can imagine, we are getting a lot of traffic related to the request for emissions inventory. We suggest that you initially reach out to the help desk that I have here on the slide. And then we will normally, if your question can't be initially addressed, we will have someone on the staff contact you through email. And to work through any specific questions you have, we can be available by phone.
Charles asks, if we update the RO status in EIS, will our APCD permit information also be updated?
This is a great question, and it's a question we get a lot. So no, the APCD permit information is separate from the mission inventory system. The reason being is that some facilities understandably want to keep their permit contact separate from their mission inventory contact. And we want to give facilities two different routes to manage that contact information. So there is a form to fill out, and you can email our permits department for that form, or email it to them. Sorry, it's on our website. To update the permit information. But by updating EIS, the permit information will not be updated.
Okay, Paul's asking, can you give an example of a diesel engine greater than 50 horsepower that is non-permitted?
There are pieces of equipment that are registered through the state of California, and other programs that are greater than 50 horsepower are portable, usually brought on site by contractors that are not required to have a district permit.
Okay, Robert is asking, what if the person listed retired? So he might be asking how to change an RO or a listed user.
I think, Mike, you covered this earlier, but do you have any quick suggestion?
Yes, the first thing I would recommend is that if you've identified someone who's no longer, who is your RO, like on the required to report list, it is best that you go ahead and register with the new person who's going to take over that role. So go and do the request access, enter your email address, enter the EIF ID. You'll get a confirmation email back saying that this individual that you probably identified is currently the RO. Then you go on and then do the request RO item, and then fill out again your email and the EIF ID, and it will switch you over automatically.
Okay, Ryan has a fairly detailed question here. Johnny, if you're looking at that, is this something we want to answer now, or should he ask?
No, I think I can summarize this. So in general, Ryan, I think that you're asking about the additional substances form that has been added to certain CTR facilities. And you're asking if those chemicals, substances need to be reported just for permitted equipment or everywhere in the facility. So the answer is for everywhere in the facility. And that's why it was added under permit 0. It's not just for the permitted equipment. It is substance-based. So, and those are for the specific CTR facilities, like I had mentioned. And then the other question, does each substance need its own P1 form per stack? So each tab in the EIQ form is associated with a certain site and type of equipment. And so if one piece of equipment is emitting several different substances, all of those can be listed under one tab. But so you don't need a tab for each pollutant or substance, but you do need one for each device.
Okay, to Bud's question, are we going to include answers to questions to download for future reference? So, Bud, this is all still being recorded, but he might be asking Janya.
It is
a written document.
Yeah, so also just we did this on our last webinar as well. Like I said, we like to field all these questions so we understand what we may be able to add to our online resources. If we find that there was a question that was asked and is not answered in our online resources, we will adjust those and edit them. And so, for example, in our last webinar, there was a couple questions that were asked that were not in our FAQ guide, so we updated our FAQ. So when we review this presentation, then we'll do the same. So far, other than the requests for demoing specific equipment types, I think all of this is covered in our FAQ.
Okay, Paula has 2 questions. How were the non-permitted devices activated for each EIF ID? Did all new facilities to EIS get a standard non-permitted device, or were they specific to each facility?
No, they were added to all. So most of the facilities that were added to the 2022 inventory, all we have on file is information related to the permits. And so in order to bridge the gap between the permitted equipment and what the amended regulation is asking, we added the non-permitted devices to all facilities.
Okay, a couple more requests for demos, spray booths, small boilers. Patty asks, where can we find the new list of TACs, the new 700 TACs that were mentioned in the last training?
So there are several places that I will mention here, and then we can provide in the chat later as well. So the one that I would like to suggest first is in EIS. So as Mike demoed earlier, in the emission factor section, you can add a pollutant and up pops a list of 900 some substances. That list includes all of the substances that need or are required to be quantified for 2022 by both the CTR and the EICG. Those that are familiar with those regulations know that there are more chemicals to phase into the program over the next couple of years, but the list that is currently in there only includes those that are required for 2022. So that's the first resource. The next resource is we do have a list online as well, and that's available with our user's guide, and you can see the list there. Also, these are a combination of criteria pollutants and substances from the EICG Appendix A1 and the CTR additional substances to be reported. And so they can be found in those regulations as well.
Paula asked, will the demonstration be available before April 7th?
Yes, we hope to get the demonstrations out pretty soon. And so I would expect, I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks. And they will also, as they're completed, they'll be uploaded. So I think Emergency Engines is the first one we're going to do. And then we'll notify everybody through GeoGov that it's been updated. And we'll continue with a couple others that we've had requests for as well.
Okay. Montrose Environmental asked, do facilities have to report data for air district permitted portable engines? And then related to that, are non-permitted portable engines exempt from reporting?
So I think I had mentioned this earlier, but a majority of the reporting requirements are substance driven. But for the CTR requirements, the permitted processes seen in the phase-in schedule are only applicable to permitted equipment. So if this is to determine applicability, it's for CTR, it's going to be your permitted equipment. But in terms of quantifying emissions, you do need to report emissions associated with all portable equipment. For the non-permitted portable engines, those are going to be greater than 50 horsepower.
Okay. Laura Lynn has 62 facilities, some with several pieces of permitted equipment. What application should we use to provide lat and long coordinates in the questionnaire? Is it sufficient to provide one set of coordinates for all equipment located at one site?
So the CTR requirement is for those CTR facilities that have been identified as required to provide the stack location. It needs to, I think the regulation specifically says it needs to be the location of the stack itself, and not an average location for that point source.
Okay, Christina has 3 questions. So the first one is, how would she know the control request information needed to complete the information like stack height, etc.?
So if it needs to be required, it'll be highlighted green. And then it'll come up in the QA/QC later. If not completed, it'll show an error that it needs to be completed.
Okay. She's seeing an unpermitted generator under 50 horsepower on her list. How does that get removed?
So I believe you might be referring to the portable equipment. If not, then please contact us and we'll look at removing that. If it is for the portable equipment and that doesn't exist on site, please use the zero emissions function that Mike demoed earlier.
Okay, and Christina is asking, do we have an estimate on when the generator training, generator demo will be posted on the website?
So I hope it will be soon. Although the demonstration that Mike did earlier is very similar to an emergency engine or a generator. So I would suggest reviewing this presentation as well and the demonstration that Mike completed because they're going to be very similar to the demonstration for our emergency engine.
Nick manages a large number of sites and has already logged in. How does he claim all of the other EFID numbers?
So as Mike mentioned earlier, the registration page has now been edited so that you can register for those sites and then just include is it a semicolon or a Mike
Comma.
between each EFID?
You can use comma or semicolon between the numbers.
Okay, so you go to the registration page, enter your email, and then enter all of the different EIFIDs to register. And then those should bring them into your single account.
Now, I can add a little bit to that. If you were listed multiple times on the required to report 2022 data, those would already be in your profile. So once you unlocked or registered for one of them, all of the other ones would appear automatically. If you're trying to acquire because you have differences in RO, then you definitely need to do the registration for them.
Okay, next up is Daniel. This one might be for Mike. Can new materials, for example, coatings or engines, be added directly into the EIQ forms by adding additional columns and selecting Add for the action row?
That is correct. Yes, you can.
I'm sorry, Mike. No, I think please correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, in the chat, or we can unmute you.
I can't see the chat.
Yeah, so we can't use the EIQ forms this year to add or remove devices.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that needs to be done in the data entry direct as demoed by Mike earlier. We hope that this is a capacity in EIS in the future, but right now the EIQ forms are pre-rendered, meaning that they represent the emission inventory when the account was created. And they are not live documents, meaning they won't update as you input data into the system. They won't remove it as well. So if you want to add or remove, please use data entry direct and do not use the EIQ forms to do that. The EIQ forms should just be used to enter data.
yes.
Okay. If there's no usage, does Daniel need to include stack information?
That's not a requirement this year. If there's zero usage, you should be able to zero out and all the requirements associated with that form will be completed.
Okay. Mark is asking about if a 2020 EIS report is found but not submitted in the dashboard, does it have to be reviewed by the RO for submittal in addition to a 2022 report?
No, so as some of you might be aware, is that EIS was operational, the portal was operational before 2022. 2022 is the first data year in which it's a requirement. Because of that, there are emission inventories previous to 2022 that exist, but nothing is needed at this time for those unless directed by us at the district to complete. So if you see the 2020 submission shouldn't be needed at this time.
Okay. Wendy's asking about emergency engines, generators. Emergency use is being requested. Will it be used to calculate a facility's emissions?
So in general, it will be used to calculate emissions. It may not be used to calculate risk. The reason being is that over the last couple of years, there have been several executive orders for the usage of emergency engines during certain emergencies. And so depending on when the emergency use took place and the executive orders that were in place at that time, we will calculate the emissions, but those emissions won't be used to calculate risk if the executive order and the emergency usage align.
Patty is asking what document is EICG?
The EICG is the AB 2588 hotspots regulation. And that is the part of the regulation which details the requirements for reporting substances, toxic substances, used to create prioritization scores. The actual acronym stands for Emission Inventory Criteria, Guidelines, and Regulation.
Charles is asking, how do they complete the CTR information for a diesel genset if the published required information, exhaust temp, CFM, are not available?
So we have guidance online on how to find this information. Includes a whole host of different resources, including manufacturer information, engineering estimates. And so if you're able to achieve this information through any of those different avenues, then that's how we suggest that you report it. It doesn't necessarily need to be like the nameplate. It can come from various sources.
Valentine asks, in the inventory user box, can I modify email and name, or do I go to WebLakes to make those changes?
At this time, please go to EIS support. In the future, we hope that users can manage their contact information directly in EIS, but right now that's not a capability.
Okay, Bud is asking about renting a standby diesel generator for the day. Does he need to report, or does the rental company report that?
So if it's taking place physically at your location, then it should be reported under your emissions inventory.
Okay. Ruth Ann is asking about, there's a new PFAS question this year. What's the expectation, even if she only uses 1 gallon of fire foam?
Yeah.
Does she have to calculate emissions on that?
So right now we just have a questionnaire connected to this requirement. So certain CTR facilities have newly listed substances that they need to quantify. And for those CTR facilities, one of them is a specific PFAS compound. This one is a little bit cart before the horse. The EPA hasn't come out with the official calculation method yet. So we're looking to them hopefully soon to see what the emissions calculation will look like. So we have requested some generic information that we believe will help us complete these calculations in the near future. And yes, any amount of the substance should be reported in that form that's connected to PFAS.
Raymond is asking, how precise do we need our longitude and latitude? Longitude and latitude.
So we do suggest to use the consistent guidance of whichever datum is being used. And so I think right now, Mike, please correct me if I'm wrong, but is it 3?
3 decimal places will get you down to the meter.
Yep. So 3 would be the suggested.
Okay. Ken asks, where is the link to the list of substances? Does this apply to intermittent use of a can of spray paint, use of IPA for cleaning, painting walls with latex paint?
Again, it's not based on the quantity of material used, but what is in that material, and it's the listed substances. Like I said, that can be found in EIS. You can pull up the pollutant table under the emission factors tab, or you can find it online on our website.
Okay, Paula, she's asking for if we do a demonstration of small boilers to include examples for calculations.
So the calculation procedures are already on our website. I believe the demonstrations we'll be providing are a step-by-step through process of EIS, and they will not include the calculations.
Okay, I'm going to read Patty's question. I don't quite understand what she's asking, but if we report a material with CTR, should we add this material also in the other reports?
I as well don't quite understand your question, Patty. I would suggest either reaching out to us directly for this question or raising your hand. And once we get through the other questions in the chat, maybe we can unmute you and you can explain your question.
Okay. From Camille, for spray booths, do we need specific information for exhaust flow and exhaust temperature, or is there a way to estimate this?
There are ways to estimate this. The district currently, we don't suggest any certain way to estimate because it's dependent on the type of equipment that you have. So there are sometimes we will suggest certain like unit factors or conversions. In this case, it's going to be dependent on the equipment that you have. And so that can normally be found in the equipment specs, or the equipment, the manufacturer of the equipment might have a suggestion on how to calculate that too.
Okay, Daniel asks, do they only need to report emergency generators and portable generators if they're over 50 horsepower?
The 48 horsepower is a specific CTR amendment to the regulation, and it's for portable equipment, portable diesel equipment only.
Okay. Robert asks, is there a simple list of items that need to be reported to APCD?
We do it's given by each equipment type. So on our website, under each specific topic, there is a emissions inventory system instructions, and in that instructions gives a general outline of the type of data that should be reported, but it's per equipment type.
Okay, I'm going to read Paula's question verbatim. Can you confirm that the stack control request green fields is also for vents?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark is asking, how is this reporting different than the reporting for SERS, San Diego County Department of Environmental Health? Is there any overlap, such as quantity of diesel fuel on hand and waste motor oil?
There may be overlap, but these are two differently regulated programs. So the systems do not overlap exactly, and they don't talk to each other. Our system is completely independent, and we do report to the state of California, the California Air Resources Board, but we do not use SERS.
Jennifer received several EIS letters for emergency backup generators. However, she only has one listed in the inventory configuration. Should she email WebLakes or to have the remainder of the units added?
Yeah, you can do that. Or as suggested earlier, you could go to the registration page and include all the EIF IDs being separated by semicolon, and that will register those as well.
Okay, Bud is asking, are there going to be charges from APCD on all the reported items, or is the charge for the site's permit?
Charges as in fees?
I think fees is what he means.
Fees. Yeah, sorry, I realized that you're muted at the moment, so you can't talk. So we do have two different emission fees that are listed in our Rule 40. One is specific to those which emit more than 5 tons per year of criteria emissions only. And then another one that's related to our hotspots. Hotspot facilities, and those which have prioritization scores and health risk analysis associated with them. We do not have a general emissions inventory fee at the moment, meaning that there is no fee associated with a certain amount of equipment or a general inventory. The fees are only going to be for those with 5 tons per more of criteria emissions, and then those that are part of the hotspots program.
Okay, Camille asks, if additional pollutants and PFAS-related compounds are required to be reported for a non-permitted engine over 50 horsepower, but that engine is not on site, is this requirement required for the permitted engines?
I think I might have followed that. But in case I'm misanswering this, please contact us. You can email us. In general, including PFAS or permitted equipment, it should be reported at the location in which they are being operated, and that's where the emissions are taking place. So if it's off-site, then it should be reported where it's operating and under that specific facility.
Okay, Roy is asking, are we required to fill out the information for non-permitted devices?
Yes, meaning that you should either report the information that's being requested or confirm that it was not in use or operational during the reporting year.
Okay. Lee notes, Janya, you mentioned near the beginning of the webinar, additional calculations will be published in the next several weeks. And Lee is asking what source types will be updated or added.
Yeah, and you can actually see this on our website now. So if you go to our emissions calculation website, we list all of the calculation methods, and certain ones have the description under them that say coming soon. So we're expecting to include learn more documents for wastewater treatments. And specifically, I think there are a couple fugitive sources, including fireworks, that should be published, as well as fiberglass and reinforced plastics manufacturing. Those are the three that come to mind. But if you go to our website and you find that there's a calculation listed that's not listed and you have a question about it, please contact us.
If Paula gets the weight percent from an SDS, does she need to upload that SDS under supporting documents?
Yes, please.
Mike asks, what if he does not have an EFID for a site?
So the list that we put online should include the EFID. So I would suggest searching that list for your facility. If you don't see that list or that facility listed on our online list and you think it should be applicable, that's when we recommend you email us and describe the facility and the permit that you have, and then we'll respond about the applicability for 2022.
Okay. Jenna, I think you have two parts to yours because you hit enter too soon, so I'm going to read this. This is from Jenna. This line item was added to both of our inventories. And here's the item. Additional substances subject to quantification and reporting. Is this an item that we can delete if it does not apply?
Correct. So it can be deleted, or for future reporting years, it may be best to use the zero emissions function because it will have to be confirmed each year that there is a requirement to report that the additional substances are not being included. And like I mentioned earlier, the additional substance list will be including more substances in the future for review.
Santos has a boiler with 4 stacks, 20 inches each. How does he report the diameter of these multiple stacks?
Yeah, so this is a very unique situation. I would recommend contacting us. We have a couple of these configurations, but not many. And so we do have a reporting configuration that we can set up that would allow to report the stack information for each stack of a single permitted boiler.
Does Paula need to report the information again in 2024?
So for the facilities that are part of phase 1 of CTR, they're reporting this year, and then they'll be required to report starting again in 24 and going forward, along with other facilities that are going to be brought into the program. The usage data for most of these sources will need to be reported every year. A data request is sent to the facility. Activity data, including pollutant weight percent associated with a specific coating or paint, should stay historical in EIS and will roll over every year.
Allison asks, is EFID assigned by company or assigned by building?
It's a physical location and it aligns to our facility or stationary source definition in Rule 2 by the district. And so, for example, a single company can have multiple physical locations. Each physical location will have its own EIFID.
Okay, Peter's asking for a demo of electroplating tank.
So this is the first request we've gotten for that. I know that we have the emergency engines and the boilers and the painting and coating that we'll be demoing. For this one, Peter, I would suggest reading out to us so you can get assistance soon, and we should be able to walk through that with you.
Patty has 12 sites permitted but received only 5 notices to report for the 2022 emissions. Does she need to request access for all 12 or only the 5 that she got letters for?
This is again where I would suggest to review that list online. So not all facilities were brought into the CTR program for 2022. Only those that we had reason to believe were in phase 1. And so if there was a reason to believe based on the permitted equipment that it was in one of the later phases of CTR, we didn't send that facility a data request letter. Also, we were using contact information based off our permit system, which sometimes is not the most up to date. So I would review that list online. If you see that all 12 are listed and that you would like to request the letters for the ones you didn't receive, we can send that to you. Or you may see that not all 12 are listed on that list.
Sarah has fire extinguishers on some commercial vehicles. If those are used to put out vehicle fire outside of the facility, does Sarah need to report this, and what should be used for the location?
Yeah, so right now we're only quantifying emissions at the physical source. So if it occurred at the physical facility, then it would need to be reported.
Ken asks, the emission factors tab only lists 33 substances. Is this the total of the substances for 2022 emission inventory?
So there's an emission factor tab for each material that is seen in your emissions inventory, and those substances are specific to that material. So for example, 33 substances, my guess that this is probably a diesel engine, and that you have 33 substances listed for diesel. If you were to select a different material, say natural gas, a new list of substances, default substances would appear, and it wouldn't be the 33 that you're seeing now. To see the full list of substances that are required to be quantified for 2022, you can click the Add button in the Emission Factors tab, and that'll bring up the list of, I think it's 930 substances that are required to be reported for 2022.
Daniel's asking to confirm that he does have to report a stationary emergency generator that's less than 50 horsepower, so it does not have a permit.
No, so for the most part, it depends on the program that you're participating in. But if you've been brought in for CTR, the activity thresholds are specific to permitted equipment. And so if your facility only has a stationary emergency generator and it's less than 50 horsepower and it's not permitted, then it won't need to be. But if you have other permitted equipment at that facility, then it should be part of your inventory.
Laura Lynn asks, what software do we suggest that she uses to obtain latitude, longitude for stack emissions?
So we have an example in our resources online. Good sources of this could be Google Maps or Google Earth. Those are two sources that we use here at the district.
Okay, a person from Montrose Environmental asks, if the RO needs to be updated for 90 plus facilities, should they email APCD or use the EIS request access method?
Technically, I think you could use the request access, but with 90 plus, I would suggest emailing links.
Okay, this one may not apply today, but this is from Jess. If a facility is below the HRA thresholds for welding emissions, will a welding permit still be required? And why? Does stationary versus portable welding affect the requirement?
Hi, Jess. Yeah, thanks for this question. I'm not sure this is related to emissions inventory. As you're aware, we have several different projects here at the district. One of them is permitting welding specific operations, but that's not, while those emissions will be included in your inventory, this process and emissions inventory system isn't directly connected to the permitting for welding.
Ruth Ann is asking about above ground tanks. Historically, in these reports, only the throughput was entered for each tank, but the QA/QC and EIS is now calling for tank seal emission rates and fitting emission rates to be entered. Is this covered in the FAQ or the user guide?
So it's covered in the calculation specific method on our website. And while it might appear that the throughput was only being required in the past, these other specific factors were being requested, but were rarely included in the data request, meaning that they were asked, but they were mostly not filled out. And so these are a requirement. And if you have questions, I would refer to our calculation procedures where we describe how to find the take sale emissions and the fitting emissions. Or you can also email us if you have questions.
Can Roy request an extension to complete the inventory?
Yes, you can email us at APC Inventory to request an extension not to exceed May 1st for CTR facilities.
Charles asks, what is the link to the resources online?
Yes, I will put that in the chat. I've been taking notes and there's several links that I will put into the chat at the end of this webinar. All of them can be found on our website.
Valentine asks, do we need to report FM 200 clean agent?
Again, this would require reviewing the SDS to see if there's any listed substances.
Okay, this is Paula. This is related to the fire extinguisher question. Can you confirm that they have to report portable fire extinguishers located on site? Is this under non-permitted devices?
I assume that you're talking about the firefighting foam, and that should all be reported for those facilities that are required to under that PFAS that has already been generated and assigned to your facility.
Okay, Daniel asks, would you suggest to zero an item or equipment if it's not known rather than deleting it?
I would, only because if it does become applicable in future years, it'll need to be added back in, and that won't necessarily be done at the discretion of the district. So I think it would be easier for a user to zero out the emissions in case it's needed in the future rather than deleting it and then figuring out how to add it back in the future.
Great. For Jess, there's an email in the chat that Mohsen put in there for you to follow up with your question. Wendy asks, the EIR letters had generic titles for facility names. Can she update the site name in the questionnaire? That's cell B5. And then question 2, will this roll over to next year in both the questionnaire and in the EIR letter? Is there a character limit?
Yeah, so this is a good question. Generally, we've asked that you contact us directly because we have to edit our system manually to change a name. And so I would suggest that, again, a facility name will be facility-wide. A facility can include multiple sites, but essentially one EIF ID is associated with one site name. So if you believe your facility name needs to change, it will, but it won't change at the site level. It'll change at the facility level, the physical location.
Okay, Stephen asks, for FM 200, only the quantity expended is reported. Is that correct?
I am not familiar with FM 200 specifically, or the process. So you'll need to review the calculator associated with that specific substance that we've assigned to it, or choose another calculator and then review the data that's being requested for it.
Santos has a tenant with a standby generator that is permitted, and the tenant received a notification from APCD. Does Santos need to list their equipment as well?
So in general, as long as the two different facilities are not sharing any processes or are not related in any way, they should be two separate facilities. And as long as they don't meet our stationary source Rule 2 definition, meaning that they're owned by the same owner and they're operated by the same operator. As you can imagine, there's a lot of different large business parks in San Diego where operators can be closely connected to each other, but they would be two different facilities as long as they're not connected in any way. So as long as there's that distinct difference between them, then they should be reported individually.
Okay, Robert missed the previous answer on portable fire extinguishers located on site. Does he need to report those? And if so, do they go under non-permitted devices where they need to add a device and material?
So for most part, you should already have a pre-populated permit which lists PFAS, and that's where you should really report that specific information. You don't need to add a new one. If you don't see the PFAS added, then contact us and we can add one for you. We wouldn't want to make sure that it gets lumped in there and not in some other portable equipment.
Scott asks, if a property has been sold and the new owner has the permit for the listed equipment, what is the transfer process?
So for the most part, the owner at the time in which the emissions occurred are those that are responsible for reporting. So if the transfer took place in 2022, then the owner at that time is responsible for reporting. For transferring to a facility, especially for the permits, that's similar to updating your contact information. There's a form on our website, and you can contact our permits department to transfer those permits. But for emissions inventory, whoever owned it at the time should be the responsible party for reporting it, unless there's been another decision made by both parties. At that point, you can contact us and we can make sure the right person has access to the EIS portal.
Yeah, I think, Johnny, in general, just to add to that, if the equipment was sold in the middle of the year, then the portion of the year that the owner or operator had the ownership, they should report that separately. So we may get two separate reports.
Yeah.
Okay, we have Charles asking, what is the minimum reportable size in BTUs for a boiler?
So for permitting a boiler, there is a minimum BTU, but for reporting emissions inventory, there is not.
Sonia asks, do we have to report all fire extinguishers if used?
Yeah, and it's reported in the amount of foam that was expressed, which is the same as using a full fire extinguisher. But yes, it should all be reported if it was used during the data year.
Okay, and Charles clears up the confusion here in the chat about FM200, so good stuff there. Thank you, Charles. That's it for the chat.
Okay, sounds good. Do we have any hands raised?
Don't see any. Oops.
I think we might have a couple.
Spoke too early.
Yes, there's one.
I'm just going to jump off of this webinar. I just wanted to thank everybody for participating, and thanks Johnny and Dan for facilitating and answering all the questions, and thanks Mike for the technical stuff about EIS.
You're welcome.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Bye now.
Thanks, Mohsen. Just so everybody who is still attending aware that we plan to stay on the webinar until most of the questions are answered. So I understand if you do need to jump off. Thank you for attending today. And there was one other question by Wendy, and Wendy, if you're still here. So thanks for the extra information. I understand your question better now. You were wondering about updating the cell in B5 in the questionnaire. So you're talking about updating the site-specific information seen at the top of the EIQ form. If you update it in the form, that will not update it in EIS. The EIQ form is meant to report the data associated with the device and not change the administrative pieces of the form, such as the site name, the name that's on the form itself, or any of that exact information. That will stay the same and can't be changed through the form. Yes, there will be a recording of this later, and I will put the links in this chat as well. Anyone who attended by Teams should be able to contact them later.
Hi, John. Yeah, it looks like we have 3 hands raised. Do you want me to go ahead and unmute them? Or
Yes,
one by
please.
one? Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Robert. If you can turn on your mic. Robert, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is kind of overwhelming for me. I've taken over a spot for a large school district, and he was talking about fire extinguisher use, and I must have 20,000 or more fire extinguishers for my school district. Am I supposed to be reporting these somehow? And then students often set these things off. Am I supposed to be reporting that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are also rather new to the reporting of compounds associated with PFAS. Like I said, the calculation method isn't made available yet, but we are asking for information that we hope will allow us to calculate in the future. So if you could, I would suggest emailing us, and I think we can probably come up to a solution. It'll probably be some sort of engineering calculation where we're estimating the amount that's being associated with those specific fire extinguishers. But right now, for those CTR facilities which have been associated as the CTR core facilities, there is no exemption for the PFAS requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and disable your mic. Next hand is Neil. Your mic has been unmuted.
Hi, question about the upload of the EIQ spreadsheets. Large facilities may use a combination of the uploads followed by direct data entry, may need to come back and reload, ideally a subset of records. How is the indexing set up? Is it possible to, will it only search and replace based on the combination of permit device ID and material ID matches, or is it you're going to lose an entire group of data that's been previously uploaded and maybe subsequently touched through the direct data entry process?
Correct. Yeah. So that's why during Mike's demonstration, he suggested to start with the forms and then move to data entry direct, because once the forms are uploaded, it will be a complete overwrite of anything that's been entered in data entry direct for this year. We hope that next reporting year is different, where we can repopulate these forms based on information that's been input directly into the system. But right now, these forms are only reading in one direction. So if you upload that form and you already had information in data entry direct, it will be overwritten.
Across all source categories, the whole thing will be replaced.
So each form is source category specific. So for example, diesel engines, if you input information for diesel engine and then you uploaded a diesel engine form, the diesel engine information will be overwritten. If you also have a boiler, that would not be overwritten unless you uploaded a boiler form as well.
Okay, so we can have multiple things going on. A large facility is going to probably want to have multiple things happening and feel confident that they can leave certain source categories alone or adjust them through the data entry process, knowing that they can still upload it other source categories without risk of losing data.
And that's correct. Yeah. So the overwrite is only for the source category form that's been uploaded. So if you upload the diesel engine form, it will not overwrite another source category. It would only overwrite that specific source category or that form.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one last question, it looks like, or actually her hand went down. Wendy, do you still have a question? I'm gonna allow your mic.
Yeah, okay, yes. Can you, we looked in the website and noticed that there was no PFAS fact sheet or some further information for calculating. We just needed a little bit more guidance on how to ask our facilities whether they have anything to report. Do you have anything that would be helpful to us for this purpose?
Yeah, so the district hasn't created any guidance at this time because, like I said, the guidance from EPA has not been finalized. The EPA does have some fact sheets about PFAS, which might be helpful. I'm seeing here in the chat, and this is a really good point, that the requirement is PFAS specific, not necessarily all firefighting foam has PFAS. Some of it does. And so the guidance that we suggest is to look at the specific chemical makeup of the foam. If it contains PFAS, then it needs to be reported. And so that usually you can look it up online and they will tell you the chemical makeup of the foam specifically in that type of equipment, be it an extinguisher or a larger unit. But the requirement right now is only for PFAS foam. PFAS, this kind of PFAS, there's a lot of different PFAS, but this one specifically is typically found in water resistant materials such as firefighting foam, but also can be found in the manufacturing of different materials, such as like clothing and food products that are water resistant.
That is helpful. So, is there a document that we can see that specifies or that states what you just said, that we're only looking for water resistant material or firefighting foam when
Mhm.
filling out that PFAS questionnaire?
So that's where I would suggest the EPA. So the EPA has a PFAS website. I can put it in the chat here. And it has information about where PFAS can come from. And in there they have a specific, I think it's like a fact sheet, and it talks about where these might be found, and that can give an indication of what needs to be reported.
Thank you. I'll look for that link.
It looks like we don't have any more hand raised.
Okay, sounds good. And Dan, I think we've answered all the questions in the chat.
There's a couple more that came in. I'm trying to find them. Roy asks, how do we calculate if a site is subject to CTR?
So CTR applicability can be found in the CARB regulation. There is a couple tables at the end of the regulation which describe permitted process and activity level, which determines if a facility is being brought in for phase 1. So reviewing those tables will give an indication if you're applicable.
Okay, and then Paula asks, can you confirm they need to report all boilers, not just the permitted ones? And this would be done under the non-permitted devices, or can they all be reported under the permitted one?
Unpermitted equipment should not be reported under permitted equipment. And correct, if a facility is being brought into the program for other permitted equipment that are above the activity thresholds, then reporting of all the emitting devices at the facility, permitted or unpermitted, are required.
Okay, and then Hunter asks, where will the recording be made available? Hunter, it will be on YouTube and as well as on our website on the emissions inventory webpage. Okay, I'm just scrolling through. I think we got them all.
Okay. One last question. If your fire extinguisher system as a whole was not discharged, then it should not be quantified. So we're only looking at the emissions that have the possibility to be emitted. If they're still sitting within a container, that means they are not being emitted. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining today. There are a couple links in the chat from the ones that were mentioned earlier. If you have additional questions, please reach out to the links that you see on the screen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think that concludes the presentation.